Hi everyone, welcome to MUE 514, Music Technology for Educators. This is our first video. This is going to be a really exciting course. I'm really happy to have you all here. We're going to look at a bunch of stuff. There's no previous technology experience required. I want to say that right off the bat. There's no need for any kind of anxiety around that. I'm here to help. And we're going to go over things in a very broad sense. And we're going to touch on a lot of topics, and I'll kind of dive into that in just a little bit. But first off, thank you for being here. I really hope that you're going to enjoy this course. So let's start with the very beginning. Who are you and who am I? So you're going to see a link below in D2L for an icebreaker. I want you to answer these questions. Where do you teach, and where do you hope to teach? What grade level of students do you work with? And also, what is the most recent song or album you listen to? What is your desert island disc? So my name is Dr. Devin Arne. I teach here at Westchester University. I do have some experience teaching younger students as well. I lived in New York City for a good number of years, and I worked as part of an after-school program teaching guitar and basic music skills to students as young as pre-K through fifth grade. So I have experience teaching a lot of different grade levels. At Westchester, I teach as part of the music technology, the studio composition program. I also oversee the Center for Music Technology here at Westchester. So I work with mainly undergraduate students, but I'm always happy to work with you folks in the summer, our master's students. And to answer the second question, my most recent album or song is probably something from the Eurovision Song Competition. My daughter and I are really obsessed with the Eurovision. It's over the top, campy, sometimes cheesy, but it's a lot of fun. And Desert Island Disc would probably be something by Radiohead. Maybe OK Computer. Hard to say. Or In Rainbows. Maybe In Rainbows by Radiohead would be my Desert Island Disc. So here's my bio. I mainly consider myself a composer, producer, educator. I play guitar, bass, keys. I work a lot in media composition. So I'm dealing with music technology day in and day out. I write music for commercials. I've done film, TV, all that kind of stuff. I also do some more experimental work, doing sound installations and all those type of things. So music technology is my bread and butter. It's something that I love, and it's something that I love teaching about because it really opens up possibilities. You're going to see once we start getting into the textbook, it allows you to serve different student populations than you've served previously, right? It helps us expand beyond the band and choir and general music sort of ways of the past and opening up to new students and also serving our current students better. So that's sort of my big picture around music technology. I'll put a link to my bio if you want to dig into my work further, but that gives you sort of a brief overview of what I do. As I mentioned, I'm a media composer. One of the biggest areas I've worked in is music for commercials. So I've done commercials for Google, Tide, YouTube, Samsung, Mercedes, and other brands. This work is very technology focused. Composers who write for media are using DAWs, they're using microphones, they're using synths, all those type of things. So this is kind of what grounds my knowledge, right? I'm not just coming to you as a professor, I'm coming to you as a practitioner. I've done some work for television, had my music featured on Total Divas, Kardashians, done some work composing the theme music for Catalyst on PBS and MTV's The Real World. Here's some artists that I've worked with as well. Skinny Atlas, producer, is sort of in the lo-fi genre. LaGuardia Cross, who's beyond music on to have a really successful career as a YouTuber, and Dylan Owen as well.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, aliens and androids, this trip is
Let's take a look at the course. Let's do a little overview into the course and what we're going to go over. So the objective of the course is to empower music educators with the knowledge and practical skills necessary to effectively integrate music technology into their practice. You're going to use various software and hardware for recording and editing, creating compositions and notation and sequencing tools, critically examine the impact of digital platforms on music education. So I want to focus this course on being effective right now. We're talking about what are students listening to, what is their environment, what are their expectations, how can we better align with those expectations in their environment. And it's going to be a lot of hands-on work. Looking at the third point there, through hands-on assignments and reflective discussions, students will design lesson plans incorporating electronic music techniques and investigative and innovative applications, including assistive technologies and AI. AI is something that I've presented on at various educational forums. It's something that we can't ignore. It's something that we should form informed opinions to, rather than blindly thinking of it as some sort of savior or having some sort of gut reaction to it. The best approach to AI is to be informed and to learn, and that's what I want to encourage you all to do. We're going to do some exercises around that later in the semester. And then you're going to be doing a final project or paper that synthesizes these concepts and applies them to a specific aspect of music technology relevant to you. I want this course to ultimately be relevant to your practice, the students that you work with, the students that you hope to work with, and really kind of make it, something that you can take away with and do what you want. We're going to cover a large breadth of things. Some of them you might find challenging. Some of them you might find really easy. With the assignments, this is something that I encourage students in all my courses, right? As musicians, we are often perfectionists, right? We want to get it right. We've spent hours in the practice room honing our craft, and that's wonderful. And I want you to take that spirit to these projects, but I also want you to feel like you don't have to be pressured to create your best composition ever. What I want you to do is engage with the technology. So I know everybody's busy doing different things. I don't expect you to spend hours and hours on these projects, but I do want you to engage with the technology. So don't focus so much on making the perfect piece of music, but show me that you're trying. Show me that you're trying new things, right? That you're working with MIDI, that you're working with microphones, that you're going above and beyond what you've done before. That's really what I'm looking for. I know everybody's busy, and I don't want you guys to have to feel like, oh, I have to spend 6 hours on this assignment. No, move through it quickly. If you need help, that's what office hours are for. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what you do in this course. This is a bit of the syllabus. I won't talk through it too much, but it's here, right? We have our textbook. We have a required hardware. You can take a look at that in more depth in the syllabus. If you don't have some of the hardware, it is worth investing in. So that's why I've sort of made it like a requirement. I understand everybody's coming from a different financial situation. So there are resources available for you at the Presser Library. Those things that they have there, they have interfaces, they have microphones, they have stands and cables and that sort of stuff. It is a 7-day loan period. So you just need to be a little bit strategic about when you check that out. Say like, okay, I'm going to knock out these 3 assignments during that 7-day loan period. And then maybe a little bit later, I'll check it out again and I'll use it for those assignments. If you have any issues with or questions about that, just let me know. I'm here to support you, but just wanted to kind of go over that quickly. In terms of software materials, I really want to focus on things that you could take and then use in your classrooms. So I wanted to focus on things that are cross-platform, Windows and Mac, and a lot of things that are web, right? I know a lot of times working with school IT departments, it can be a lot of headache about installing things and getting permission and the end user license agreements. I get that. So I wanted to introduce you to tools that are either free or are web-based. You might be familiar with other tools. I mentioned, other DAWs, or that's digital audio workstations such as Logic or Ableton. If you use those already, you're welcome to use those for the assignments. But I do want you to at least check out something like Soundtrap. You can also take a look at BandLab, but that's sort of beyond the scope of this class. In terms of audio editing and recording, there's some great programs from Adobe and other makers. I personally use Isotope RX. So you're welcome to use anything like that, but there is Audacity. It's been a mainstay since the late 90s in terms of free audio. It's not great for music. It doesn't have MIDI. It doesn't really work in measures and beats, but it's great for recording audio. So it's great for recording and editing podcasts, or if you just wanted to record a solo violin piece, or you just wanted to plug in a microphone and record in your guitar without thinking about playing with a click track. It's great for that. And we'll take a brief look at notation software. I had originally wanted to do a little bit more with music notation software. I didn't want to overload you folks. We're really going to be looking at those from the perspective of not a creator, but as an educator, and in looking at evaluating these three free platforms: MuseScore, NoteFlight, and Flat.io. So again, I won't cover this like in super detail, but I just wanted to kind of like, this is from the syllabus. This is our course overview. What I want to talk about in this lecture is that we're dividing it into sort of units, right? So our first unit is sort of an introduction, course philosophy. I want you to reflect on where you're at right now, and I really want you to dig into these first 2 chapters of the textbook. The textbook is a wonderful book. It really can be eye-opening and offer some different perspectives. So we'll be engaging with that, recording our reflections for assignment 2 and module 2. And Unit 2, we'll be really talking about the audio side of things, recording musical performances. So we're looking at different aspects of that: microphones, recording, editing, basics of mixing and mastering, so you can talk about those with confidence to your students. And we'll talk about publication and distribution. After your students create things, how are they going to be able to share them with their friends and family? And how do the way we share music right now, how does streaming affect music in the way, not just how we listen to it, but how it's made and how we think about it? Part 2, we're going to look at some electronic music creation. So here's where we're going to get into our sequencing, our beat making. We're going to talk about synthesis, which is a really great topic in a little bit of depth, sampling and remixing, how those can be used to make fun lessons. And then we'll do some reflections on music notation and composition software. And then in Unit 4, we're going to talk about some sort of different things that other courses might not touch on, but that I feel are super important. This is DIY and music technology development, assistive technologies and NIMEs, new interfaces for musical expression, and then module 14 looking at AI and music production. And finally, you all will do a final project. So maybe there's something that we cover, right? This is definitely a survey course, but maybe there's something that you personally want to go deeper in, or there's something that you want to do. You want to create a bunch of lesson plans and get feedback on that. Whatever it is, you'll be sort of doing a proposal in module 11, and then by module 15, you'll be focusing on your final project. So I wanted to go real broad here in the beginning, right? A lot of people come to see this word technology and they say, oh, that's not what I do. But I want to kind of have you think about it a little bit more, a broader historical context, and see that you already engage with music technology, and kind of think about what music technology is and why we're using it. So defining music technology is the study or use of any device, machine, or tool to make or perform music, compose, notate, and play back recorded music, or analyze and edit music. So anytime we're listening to music on a digital device, or even a tape recorder, or even a vinyl record player, we're using music technology, right? Anytime we're using electric guitar, electric piano, we're using music technology, or even an acoustic instrument, which we'll get to in a second, or to analyze or edit music, right? If we've ever used a tool like Transcribe to help us transcribe software, or if we've ever gone on YouTube and played something at 0.75 speed, right? We're using music technology to learn music. So let's look first at performance technologies. So music technology is about 40,000 years old, right? So if we think about music technologies, anything outside of our body that we use to make music, something that humans had to invent, right? We can look at these examples from, records that's showing that there's instruments that go back about 40,000 years. So probably even before the invention of modern languages, and definitely before the invention of written language, people are using music instruments. Ancient Egyptians were using stringed instruments about 1000 BCE. So for quite a while, we've had things that resemble a modern harp or a modern guitar. And in ancient Greece, they were using complicated mechanical instruments, right? So here's from about 100 BCE. that we see this hydraulis, like a water organ and a trumpet. And we can think about all of the instruments of the sort of modern symphony orchestra, right? A lot of them have very complex mechanical features like the piano, right? Or the timpani, all the valves on our brass instruments or the different mechanisms on our string instruments, right? These are all forms of music technology. Looking at sort of more recent inventions, we have these electromechanical instruments. These are really interesting to me because they occupy this sort of in-between zone, right? They are producing sound using either physical means like a vibrating string or a vibraphone, a mallet bass instrument, but with a motor, right? Or they're sort of simple electro mechanical instruments like the mellotron, which you'll see here, or the organ here, electric organ. So we have this definition here: electromechanical instruments produce sound through combination of electronics and actual playing. There's physical instruments, right? The pipe organ, vibraphone, glass harmonica. There's modified acoustic instruments, electric guitar, Wurlitzer or Fender Rhodes piano. And there's instruments that rely on electrical components for sound production, like the telharmonium, Hammond organ, or mellotron. I'll put this video in the module so you can watch through there. It gives you some really cool view of this mellotron, which if you haven't heard before, is a super cool instrument from the 1960s. It's probably most famously featured in the Beatles' Strawberry Fields. David Bowie also used it. It's a really cool sounding instrument. So the next sort of category would be electronic instruments. So electronic musical instrument produces sound using electronic circuitry. Electronic instruments output electronic or digital signal that is ultimately plugged into a power amplifier, which drives a loudspeaker, creating the sound which is heard by the performer and listener. So we have things like the MUE synthesizer, or famously, if you've heard any music from the 80s, any pop music or Christmas music from the 80s, the Yamaha DX7, or the Roland TB303. A quick aside about the TB303, this was originally meant to be something that like gigging musicians would use to recreate the sound of the electric bass, but it was actually not so good at that. It was really good at making these weird synthy, squelchy kind of sounds. So this was known in the UK, the Second Summer of Love, this sort of rave, big beat and all sort of house music, techno music. It was really featured, did really well in that music. Didn't do so good with your restaurant musician or your wedding band, but it was really created a whole new style of music. So a really cool piece of technology. If you scan this QR code, you can also go check out the Web Audio Synth V2. Also, if you just download the PPTX of this presentation, you can click on that link there. Play around with that. We're going to be talking about a lot of these things, and this is a great way to sort of get your students exploring synthesizers without having to invest hundreds or maybe even thousands of dollars in getting some hardware synthesizers. But this is a really cool tool, so make sure to pause the video, scan that QR code. Right, there's also music technology involved in capturing music or recording music. So pretty early on, people figured, hey, what if people in the future want to play the music that we've written now? So we can think of music notation as a technology in itself, in that it's allowing music to exist beyond the performance or beyond one generation of musicians who can pass that down orally, or to musicians that you would never encounter. So there's the Sicelius epitaph from ancient Greece, the first century of the Common Era. It had the lyrics of the song. It also had some markings that showed the sort of direction of the melody. So one of the earliest music notations. Here you can see sort of a close-up of the epitaph there. There's also music notation systems that developed around the world, right? We often think of Western notation, but there's many different traditions around the world. Here we have an example from Korea. There's Tibetan chant notation, which looks very beautiful, showing these sort of fluid lines of the chant. And there's different systems of tablature. So for any guitar players, you're familiar with tablature, right? There's the Chinese guqin zither notation, worked very similar to our sort of modern guitar tabs that people share online. That's giving a set of physical instructions versus a set of musical instructions in terms of pitch and duration. It's giving you an idea of what you should do with your hands. You're all very familiar, right, with our Western staff notation. This is, again, music technology. Here's an example of some, printed and handwritten notation. And sort of like, if we start there, we start saying, okay, there's ways that we can capture music by writing it. This is where another really interesting technology emerges, right? In the 1700s, we start to have mechanical devices that can capture music and play it back. So we're sort of taking the human out of the loop, right? The human is only involved in the writing, the sort of putting it down onto a machine, right? Just like they're involved with putting it down onto stone or to paper. I will put this video in D2L as well, so you can check it out. This is from 1784, an automaton, like a musical robot, playing a piece of music, and it's made to look like Queen Marie Antoinette playing a dulcimer. So we could think of this as like a precursor of MIDI, right? This is like capturing music and putting it on a physical device, right? That can then be sort of hand cranked and it can play music. So it was a big fascination in France in the 1700s that has direct connections, I think, to today. Later on, that evolved into things like the player piano, right? So we had this idea of the piano roll. And we still use that term today. When we're talking about MIDI, we call that a piano roll notation, where we see not just the 5-line staff, but we see the whole 88 keys, and we see little boxes, right? So if you open up any DAW, it'll have something similar to that. And this technology goes back to the 1850s. Again, you can check out this video in D2L. And here's that correspondence I'm talking about there. It's sort of tilted 90 degrees, but you can see here's our piano roll. It's interesting. You can even see some lyrics there. And then here's our piano roll in Soundtrap, which we'll be checking out. This is another great video that I'll put up in D2L. This is an example sort of black MIDI, where you're sort of creating musical shapes overwhelming the piano to almost create a synthesizer-like sound, and playing things that would never be humanly possible, right? So that once we create machines that can play themselves, right, we're not limited to 10 fingers anymore, or the speed at which we can physically move our fingers. There's always a limit to that. But once we create musical machines, we not only make ways of recording the music that we could create as humans, but we open up possibilities that reach beyond our physical limitations. And I think that's one thing that's really interesting about music technology. So here I have a picture of some various ways that people have invented to capture sound, right? So now we're not just talking about, okay, I'm going to write a melody and put it on a piano roll, but actually capturing the sound of a performer's voice, of their approach to their instrument. And that goes all the way back to the phonograph cylinder, right? This looked like a can of beans that you would record music on. That goes back to 1877. And the gramophone record, the reel-to-reel, and we'll dig a little bit deeper into this stuff, but I just wanted to kind of give an overview of those technologies. Here you can see some of these early technologies. And I'll move kind of quickly through that stuff. Feel free to pause this video if you want to read these really carefully. The multi-track recorder made a lot of advances beyond the early vinyl recording. And now that you could not just have to stop your take midway through and throw that record out, right? Now you could say, let me go back and let me just start on the second verse, and I'm going to record my vocals for the second verse. I didn't like that. I'm going to rewind again. I'm going to record again. This is where our modern type of recording comes into play, where recording becomes flexible. You can record one instrument at a time. If a player makes mistakes, you can just rewind and record again. So it really kind of starts to push us toward the modern era where we are today. Here's some information on that. Again, I want to move things quickly through here, but if you're really interested in this stuff, feel free to pause the video, read through these carefully. Getting to things we probably remember from our childhood, right? Compact discs, co-developed by Philips and Sony, debuted in 1982. It was a digital optical format. It had 74 minutes of capacity. This is a little bit different than the record, which you can only fit about 40 minutes on the long playing 12-inch LP. So the Marshall Matters LP from 1999 clocks in at over 70 minutes. So again, the physical medium starts to change what people are doing, right? Whereas in the 70s, people would do a 40-minute album or maybe an 80-minute double album ask their fans to spend a little bit more money on that. But now people could fit 70 minutes on the CD. So the expectations in many genres and rock and hip hop became, oh, you have to make an album that's 60 minutes, 70 minutes long. A huge leap forward or a challenge for the music industry occurred in the late 90s once the MP3 was introduced. An MP3 relies on the properties of psychoacoustics, which is the study of how humans perceive sound, to dramatically compress or dramatically reduce the file size of music. So I imagine many of you are familiar with the MP3. It's a much smaller way of transporting music, and we'll be looking at converting music file types in our second module. It was introduced in 1993 by the Fraunhofer Society Research in Germany. The small size of MP3 files made it possible to store libraries of recordings on personal computers and share it with others across dial-up internet connections. So here you can see this screenshot of Napster. People would have their collection of MP3s on their computer, and they could access other people's MP3s on the computer and download those copies. So it was peer-to-peer file sharing. The music industry, when this came out, they were really upset, so upset that there was big lawsuits going on. Individual users of this software were getting sued. I think there's a famous case where a grandmother from Iowa was sued because her grandson or granddaughter had downloaded music on the computer. So the RIAA kind of really went after this, and they tried to put the genie back in the bottle, but it was kind of too late, right? Once people could have music on the internet, they wanted to have music, available to them. And that sort of led to where we are today, sort of through the intermediate step of iTunes, where people are buying music, individual copies of music on iTunes or similar services. Now people pay a subscription service or use an ad-supported service to stream music. And you can see sort of the different ways people do that, with Spotify being the most popular, Amazon Music and Apple Music also being popular. These are like things like Tencent. These are popular across the globe. YouTube Music and other things there. So you can see this is a couple of years old now, but we can see there's a lot of people listening to music through streaming. The final sort of way we can think about music technology, right? We've talked about instruments. We've talked about sort of the recording of music. The other thing we can think about is analyzing and editing music, right? So using music technology as a tool for analysis, right? And this sort of builds up these sort of ancient and sort of early modern practices of music theory, right? How does music work? People have been interested in this question a long time and had various ways of looking at it through notation or experiments with physical instruments, as we can see from this sort of medieval book looking at Pythagoras. There's a great example today of music theoreticians using technology. So in his 2019 book, Flow, The Rhythmic Voice in Rap Music, Mitchell S. Orner uses custom Python programs to reveal how subtle changes in timing influence the feel and flow of rap lyrics. So while notation is great, if we really want to analyze music performance, we're going to need technology as an intermediary that can look at a song that's in a certain BPM and see if vocalists are pushing, if they're ahead of the beat, if they're dragging, they're behind the beat, they're right on the beat. How does that idea of flow, right? How could we analyze that without technology, right? We could say our subjective feelings, but technology allows us a way to analyze music performance in a way that was not possible before. So if we just think that music technology is for synthesizers and recording, there's a lot more to it than that. And we'll look at how this has implications for AI, how it has implications for assistive music technologies. There's a lot more than meets the eye or that is available at first glance when you think about music technology. Here's some pictures here. We have a spectrogram that analyzes the harmonic content of a sound, and an oscilloscope, right? Almost looks like a medical device, or could be a medical device that is measuring the amplitude or frequency of a waveform. So we've looked at all these different technologies: performance, recording, analysis. If only there was a technology that allowed users to accomplish all of these tasks. There is the digital audio workstation. So the digital audio workstation, they appeared, probably in the late 80s. Here it says Pro Tools came out in 89. It wasn't widely used, and it started to gain more popularity as we get closer to the 2000s. A digital audio workstation, for those of you who are wondering, is a software application used for producing, recording, and editing audio files. It's sort of, if you could imagine a recording studio in the late 80s, early 90s, where you have your large format mixing console, you have a digital tape recorder like a DAT recorder, you have lots of reverbs and outboard gear. What the DAW is taking that studio and making it into software, right? All the things that you could do in the studio, you can now do via software on a personal computer. So this is a huge recording revolution that happens in the 90s. So DAWs have a central interface that allows a user to alter and mix multiple audio MIDI tracks into a final produced piece. Here's some common DAW platforms you might be familiar with: Logic X, or Logic 11 now, Pro Tools, Ableton Live, FL Studio might be very popular with your students, particularly those who are interested in EDM and hip hop. Right, though they're different features, there's different graphic user interfaces. They all have the central features: the ability to edit audio, the ability to edit MIDI, and create fully produced musical compositions. So definitely let me know what questions you had about this presentation. I look forward to hearing your icebreakers. Thank you for being a part of this class, and look forward to seeing you in the next module.